I remember in high school, we had a teacher that came and explained to us the warning signals of being recruited by a cult. And she made plain, it doesn't matter whether you're highly educated or you have no education at all. When you are at your most vulnerable in life, there will be groups seeking to take advantage of you. Now, fast forward years later, I'm an anthropologist now, I'm a sociologist, I've gained experience in doing historical research. I also have been through a bit more in life. And there was this weird cult from South Korea that tried to recruit me and a fellow believer in Rotterdam also. So a lot of stuff happened. Also, my other bad stuff happened also. I won't go into detail. I can confirm what that teacher told us, but I want to dive deeper into it. As I did already on this channel, but in this video or audio message, I want to highlight one important aspect of being gang stalked. And I would say sucked into a bad situation, because if you're tricked into a cult, that's a bad situation. I want to highlight this aspect that's often not mentioned. Look, whether it's being gang stalked, so people ganging up on you behind the scenes, or, and by the way, being gang stalked is quite common, or it is you being dragged into a cult, or it's you ending up in a bad situation, a really bad situation, a situation that has a life or death scenario, or whether it's you ending up severely traumatized with lifelong psychological or physical damage. Look, in life, bad things happen. All right? I don't care how well your parents raised you. I don't care how good your intentions are. I don't care if you know the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. I don't care about any of that because it doesn't matter. Bad stuff happen. The key is not to be upset because bad stuff happens. Because bad stuff do happen. Now you can't get upset when it's something ridiculous that happens. There's nothing wrong with that. However, the key is to be ahead of bad things happening. Because when you are ahead of bad things happening, you are now ruling the situation. If you just wait for bad stuff to happen, now you're captured by the situation, and the situation has power over you, as well as other people that are using the situation. So, as a grown human being, you can be ahead of things. You don't need to have millions of euros. You don't need to have deep secret knowledge of the occult. You don't need superhuman powers like you see in those superhero movies. What you need is a good dose of self-reflection and humility. Humility is not you thinking you're nothing. Humility is you admitting when you're vulnerable and fragile, and admitting when you need help. That is humility. Humility is admitting that you need other people and you need collaboration. So humility is just being realistic about yourself and the context you're in. Now, why is this? Every human being has a bias or multiple biases. That is the first thing you learn. Well, actually, one of the first things you learn when you become an anthropologist as well as a sociologist. Also, psychologists know this. What is a bias? A bias is a preference of how you look at something. Let me give an example. Let's say you have someone who was raised liberal and someone who was raised conservative. And then you have a case of someone being poor. They live below the poverty line. The liberal prefers to look at the whole situation, and they will map out that this individual grew up in his household that was poor. This individual applied for so many jobs. This individual even completed college, yet they're poor. And this individual comes from a certain demographic of people, while most of the managers and employers are from another demographic. So the liberal tends to focus on what's this whole situation here. And because of that, the liberal can clearly see that there's either discrimination or racism or some type of systematic exclusion going on. Sociologists are like to agree also when they examine the whole situation. The conservative is raised to just accept the role society gave to them. And if they want a better role, they need to earn it. But often, you're just expected to take the role that you have. If you come from a lower class, well, that's just how the universe or God or fate or evolution should be. If you come from a higher class, you have more privileges, well, that's just the way it is. You just need to make the best of it. So conservatives are based on conserving and preserving the traditional hierarchy. So a conservative will look at situations and say, well, you guys are poor because you don't work. Yes, they are working, but the jobs they do don't pay them well. Yeah, you're poor because you don't work. Why do you say that? Well, I have to wake up every morning and go to work too. So why can't you wake up every morning and go to work? If you wake up every morning and go to work just like me, you get paid too. But that will say, listen, they do wake up and go to work every every morning. They're just not paid well. Well, then look for another job. Well, they've been looking for another job. You get what I'm saying? This is how it goes on and on and on. The liberal is more realistic in recognizing systematic oppression. The conservative, even if they recognize systematic oppression, they make excuses for it because they have a conservative bias. Now, there are exceptions to this, but this is how it goes commonly. Look, someone that's a nationalist will have less tolerance for example, interracial relationships. Someone that's a nationalist will be upset with mass migration. Why? Because they want to preserve what they consider the local national heritage. And that means they prefer their quote unquote their own people above foreigners. Now, someone that is a cosmopolitan or as an internationalist, they have no problem with mass migration and they have no problem with interracial relationships at all. So that's a bias. Now, look, not every bias has to be wrong. Let's say if a crime scene, someone was killed. You have the detectives that arrive, the police officers that keep people away, then you have forensics arriving too. And then you have the press. Now, if you are a news reporter, your focus is to get information of what happened. If you are a local police officer, your focus is to keep people away from the crime scene so the the crime scene investigation is not tampered with. If you are a detective, you have access to the crime scene, your focus is to pick up the details about the environment. If you are a forensic worker or a forensic anthropologist, your focus is to look at the details, to gather DNA or to gather fingerprints or whatever. So again, you have a crime scene, you have a news reporter, you have a detective, you have a local police officer, and you have a forensic anthropologist. All are there with the same goal, to find out what happened. But because they have different roles, they have a different focus and therefore a different bias. And the locals also have their bias. The locals are just curious about the whole thing. Now, if the individual who passed away or was killed is a relative of someone, the relatives may be prone to disrupt the crime scene because they want to figure out what happened. Or even if they don't disrupt the crime scene, they'd be quite loud and quite hysterical, want to get answers. Why? Because they're emotionally invested in the individual that's now dead. Okay, let me use another example. Let's say you have an headache. People around you may say, just take some pill, some painkiller. And because, let's say your grandpa may tell you, man, just take a pill. Man, when I was younger and we had headache, we just moved on, didn't complain about it. It's true, when your grandfather was younger, that's how they did it. But that's why a lot of people of grandpa's generation died of underlying health issues. Now, you may say to someone, well, I don't know, I still have headaches, but I just take a painkiller. And some may tell you, how long do you have those headaches? Well, for a few months now. And they may tell you, you know what? Taking all those painkillers may cause an addiction in you, and those painkillers also have side effects. Maybe you should go to the doctor, go to the hospital to check this out. Well, you were raised by your parents and grandparents to not whine and to just get ahead, especially if you're a man, they expect you not to whine and to be more traditional and manly, just get along with life. That is the bias you have, that you're a man and you just should suck it up and continue and not to be a pussy. If you're a woman, you're told to be pleasant and stop whining and make people upset, stop bothering on people, just take a painkiller and continue. But now, you hear someone else say you maybe should go to the hospital to a doctor. You also have the bias to rely on experts. So you think, you know what? My parents and grandparents, those other people are not experts. Let me just check what an expert is saying. Nothing wrong with that. Then you arrive at the hospital, they make some scans and they found out, oh dear, there's some tumor somewhere in your body. Now, your parents and grandparents had the bias of what they believed worked for them. And it did work for them, but it also worked with a lot of side effects. Not all of the people of your parents and grandparents' generation died of undiagnosed health issues. So, because they don't know that many people that died of undiagnosed health issues, that's why they think that their attitude of just sucking it up and just continuing was a good one. Now, they are the exception of people who didn't suffer much by this dysfunctional attitude. But they seriously think their attitude is functional, even though it's not. The younger people of your generation realize, hold on a minute. This is unusual to have some headaches for so long. You can't just suck it up and continue. You need to look deeper into it. So their perspective, their bias was more proper and more healthy. And now you find out that there's an underlying health issue and they can do something about it. Look, as I mentioned before, a bias doesn't have to be wrong. Sometimes the bias is wrong because it's rooted in dysfunction, because it's rooted in trauma. A bias can also be superficial. Let's say you were born in a village near the sea. So the economy around was based on fishing. So you grew up eating a lot of fish, you grew up catching a lot of fish, and you also grew up surfing and swimming a lot. Now you have someone who grew up in some big city that was surrounded by hills and mountains. This individual is not that familiar with the sea. They can swim, they may be able to surf all of that, but when it comes to eating, they prefer to eat, I don't know, meat from cows, pork. They prefer to eat pork and all of that, while you prefer to eat seafood. whether it's lobster, whether it's crabs, or just salmon or whatever. Now, your preference for eating fish doesn't make you superior to the one who prefers to eat meat from animals on the land. Or maybe you come from an area where a lot of people eat more plant-based food. Now, some people think they're superior because they have a vegetarian lifestyle. Well, that's something they need to face about themselves. But anyway, those are biases. Is your bias for preferring seafood wrong? Is it evil? Is it harmful? No. Is your bias for preferring meat from animals on the land bad or wrong? No. Is your bias for preferring a diet without meat, is it wrong? Well, it depends on the context. Because if you don't eat meat, there are certain nutrients you'll be missing. But you can ask people that are specialized in it about it. They can tell you more. They can tell you more because that's their field. So again, your bias doesn't have to be wrong. Having a bias is natural, it's human. However, your bias must be recognized and it must be examined. If your bias is rooted in either ignorance, so lack of proper knowledge, and by the way, it's not your fault if you lack proper knowledge because you can't know everything. Okay, anyway, when your bias is rooted in ignorance, or your bias is rooted in trauma, or your bias is rooted in neglect, then you have to check your bias because your bias will get you in trouble. Sometimes your bias is based on you being proud. Namely, you don't want to face things, you just want to be left alone. Having a bias is human. Having a bias can be practical and effective, especially when it comes to work or when it comes to doing research. Because when you do research, you're researching something, you're not researching everything. So you must know which data you use, which data you don't use. So having a bias and being clear about it is relevant when it comes to doing research. Absolutely. However, if your bias is dysfunctional and defective, it must be addressed and you must unlearn it. And if you need therapy or counseling for it, you must take it. There is nothing more dangerous than an undiagnosed bias. That's what I'm going to call it. An undiagnosed bias. Now, I'm not saying a bias, I don't think undiagnosed as if a bias by default is some disease or anything like that. I'm saying that when you have a bias that doesn't add up and you don't notice it or people around you don't catch it, that's a dangerous situation. Now, I've spent 18 minutes explaining the context of a bias, just so you understand that a bias by itself is not wrong. It's healthy, it's natural, it can be effective if the conditions are proper. Now, okay, let's say now that you are having a hard time in life. You are about to graduate college and you need to look for a job and you're in a vulnerable state in your life. And then you have people passing by and they talk to you, various people, and you open up about you having difficulty finding a job, about you thinking you realize it's a bit difficult to let go of your college years and to embrace working full time and all of that. So you discuss this. And let's say now there's someone telling you, well, you don't have to work full time. You can also do part-time job to go into projects. They shock you because everyone till now told you you need to work full time so you can pay rent or pay a mortgage and so you can have enough money to raise a family, so you have enough money to take care of yourself, so you can build a pension. This is the first time you hear someone say, well, it can also be different. Now, if you are realistic, you will admit that indeed you have been shaped and therefore programmed to follow a certain path in life. And now you realize that this path may not be healthy for you. If you're realistic, you would say, you know what, let me consider what the individual said. I'm not saying you have to go deep into it, but you consider it. But if you're proud, you think, man, I worked hard to get where I'm at, blah, blah, blah. If you want to focus on the fact that, man, you just want to be left alone, you don't want to go through psychological discomfort and all of that, if you are proud, you would discard what they're saying either as bullshit or you will thank them for advice but then discard it. Then what happens? You've set yourself up. And this is what I mean. Often we set ourselves up and we're not even aware of it. Look, having a bias that's unchecked, that's not checked, or an undiagnosed bias is what makes you accessible for both evil spirits as well as bad people that seek to take advantage of you. And that is the one thing that people often don't highlight when it comes to informing people about cults and dangerous situations. Truth being told, using physical force with physical weapons is the least effective thing when it comes to tricking someone into a cult or when it comes to gang stalking someone. Because if you approach someone with physical weapons and you use physical blackmail to get them to do something, it'll be obvious that they're in danger and you're taking advantage of them. The best way to take advantage of someone or the best way to set someone up for failure or to set someone up to die is by using their own effort against them. Or let me say it differently. The gang stalkers or the cult or the people that seek to take advantage of you or to set you up, they need you to comply with what they're doing to you. They need you to comply with being victimized. And often people end up complying with being victimized. And the worst thing is they're not even aware that that's what goes on. How does this happen? Because people have an undiagnosed bias that's being used against them. So don't have this attitude, hey, I'm highly educated, or hey, I'm alert, hey, I'm not stupid, so I won't fall for certain things. Now, it's true that there are certain tricks you won't fall for. Certain tricks are way too easy and way too transparent. You think, come on, you still think I'm going to fall for this? However, when you have this proud attitude of, I'm too smart, I'm too intelligent, I'm too anointed, or I'm too old, or I'm too sophisticated, or if you have this attitude of disinterest, you're not really interested in other people nor anything around you. Those two attitudes of thinking you're too qualified or the attitude of not being interested in people around you or interested in life itself, those two attitudes are a guarantee that you will be set up and you will be tricked at some point. Only people who are meek, so they have this humble, realistic attitude, only they are able to be ahead of everything all the time. Being ahead does not mean you're able to prevent everything. It simply means that you have an advantage above bad stuff happening because you are ahead of the bad stuff. But this thing, being humble, requires self-reflection. That's something that a lot of people don't want to do. So here's how it goes. The moment you decide, because it's a decision you make, you may not speak it out. You may not realize you've made a decision. It's a decision you made. The moment you make the decision that you don't want to be challenged, you just want to be left alone and and remain in ease without being challenged and without being bothered, the moment you make this decision, you have become an open portal for evil spirits to use. Why? Because you have an undiagnosed bias that evil spirits can use to trick you either in a bad situation, or evil spirits can use this bias to have access to you to get you to do things for them. For example, if you believe that, for example, if you have this feminist upbringing because you were raised by a feminist mom and you were told to always believe a woman when a woman claims she's victimized, and you have this unrealistic belief that women can't do any harm, and that if a woman does something harmful, it's because a man made her do it. If you have this unrealistic, ridiculous attitude to life, then evil spirits can use that. And how are evil spirits going to use it? Evil spirits going to push a Jezebel female onto you, and this Jezebel woman just wants to gain sympathy, and because you were raised by a Jezebel yourself, you will recognize yourself in this Jezebel and you will believe everything she says, even if what she's saying doesn't add up. So if she claims that she was sexually aroused by someone, you believe her. Now the individual she's complaining about being sexually aroused by doesn't even know who she is. Demons are using you to validate her bullshit against that other guy, because that other guy is a believer who's walking by faith, and the demons want to hinder that believer. So the demons knew that this Jezebel will fail in distracting that believer. So now the Jezebel, as expected, turns on the believer, and now she wants sympathy in her bitching about that believer. So demons need people to pamper the Jezebel so that the opposition against the believer increases. And now demons are using you as part of the opposition. Demons did not possess your body and take over your brain. They tricked you into a situation. And why didn't you notice you were tricked? Because either you lack knowledge about how evil spirits work, or, and in this case, you have a bias that blinds you from processing things properly. Someone that was not raised the way you were raised will see this woman coming and complain about someone else who sexually aroused her, and eventually may ask questions. Okay, he sexually aroused you. Did you address it towards him? No. Did you talk about it to someone that was in a position of authority? No. Did you go to the police? No. So why are you here talk about it to people who can't help you? So that's what I mean. In this case, if you were raised in this feminist way, you have this bias that makes it easy for you to fall for certain situations. People who don't have this upbringing or who recover from it, they can process the situation much better than you do. So age is not all. Now, people that live longer on the earth, they will notice things quicker than someone that's younger. So if you're 15 years old, you will notice, there's certain things you won't notice immediately. When you're 25 or 35, you will notice things much quicker. So age has an advantage, but age is not always an advantage for everyone, because there are older people, or I say there are people who are in their 50s and 60s and beyond who still have biases that keep them in bad situations. Let's discuss another form of undiagnosed bias. In the English language, which developed in Britain, there are certain words that are called cuss words. It's a category of words you're not allowed to use. Cuss words, swear words, forbidden words. And when you use such words, people tell you to mind your language. Now, hold on. If someone tells you, I'm going to defecate, and someone else tells you, I'm going to shit, what are they saying? They're saying they're going to release waste material from their body. Now, defecating, that word has its origin in Latin. And Latin used to be the language that the church used and the government. So Latin was perceived as official. Shitting comes from the Germanic tribes. And Germanic tribes used to be considered barbarians by the Roman Empire at some point. Later on, barbarians received a better reputation. Now, in the 5th century, somewhere in the 5th century, there were many Anglos and Saxons moving to Britain. And those people mixed together and they became the Anglo-Saxons. They moved towards Britain, and there were those also mixed with a local Celtic population. So there was this kind of invasion of Anglo-Saxon migrants. And those Anglo-Saxon migrants brought their languages with them. However, the establishment or establishments there in Britain, because at some point after the Roman Empire fell in Britain, you had various kingdoms. The later kingdoms were united in the Kingdom of England. You had Scotland in the north. You can check the whole history for yourself. At some point, the establishment decided that words from Germanic origin are dirty and low. You use words from Latin and also French origin. And remember, at some point, the French or the people from France took over England, and at some point, England and France had the same king also. They almost became one and the same country, almost. So the historical process was that words from Germanic origin became words you avoid. But hold on, a big portion of the population in Britain was from Anglo-Saxon ancestry. So why are those people agreeing with looking down on the language of their ancestors? It's okay if a Chinese individual would move to Malaysia and then they are told that using words from Chinese origin are dirty, those are cuss words, avoid them. If you use words from Chinese origin, you are a low life, you're not well educated, and you don't consider other people, you're disrespectful, this and that. If that Chinese individual agrees with that, he's debasing himself. He's humiliating himself. And this is what happened in Britain. And this became the norm in the language that emerged, English. And so a lot of people that speak English, whether native speakers or they learned later in life, they get all these cultural constructs on how to speak English. Now, there are dialects of English everywhere also, but those quote unquote Germanic words in English that are looked down upon, everyone knows you don't use those words. That's bad. It's bad language. There's no such thing as bad language. They just categorize those words as bad because people want to control how you speak. Worldlings are obsessed with control, so they want to control how you talk. And here's the thing, if you are an African American, means you're not directly related to the Germanic tribes of the past. Why would you even want to agree with this restriction? So you know what I'm saying? So when you hear someone using quote unquote cuss words, they just don't agree with its historical paradigm. You do. Does your agreement with the restriction make you a better individual? No. Does them refusing the paradigm make them a bad individual? No. Now the thing is, certain words trigger people. So it's realistic to be cautious and considerate of the language you use around certain people. But that's out of basic human decency. But it doesn't mean that the words itself are wrong and you're wrong for using them. Look, judging someone based on their vocabulary is ridiculous, but it's something we often do because that's how we were raised. There are not many people challenging it. What if someone will tell you, well, the darker someone's skin is, the more you need to look out for them? That's a racist way of viewing people. But that's the same as saying if someone uses certain vocabulary, well, you need to watch out for them. It's ridiculous. but people agree with things they don't even realize are absurd. Okay, let me use another thing. In the Netherlands, when it comes to the prime minister, the current prime minister, Mark Rutte, people often say Mark. There are people saying, isn't it Prime Minister Rutte? Why are we using their first names? Because in the past, you had this convention, if someone has an office, if someone holds office, someone has a quote-unquote position of authority, you use the title of their function and their last name. That's respect. You do that. That's how we should do it. That's the right thing to do. People just did it because they were raised that way. And here's the thing. If you address the prime minister with his first name, do you harm him? No. Do you cause any bodily dysfunction in him? Do you take away from his human worth? No. But what happened in the past when you did something like that? People would punish you. People would inflict harm on you for not agreeing with the convention. So because people don't want to be harmed physically or mentally, they get along with the convention, and eventually they're brainwashed into thinking this convention is how it should be. It's just a convention. Now, conventions are not wrong. Conventions don't have to be wrong. Okay? Convention can be useful, but it's just a convention. Your human worth shouldn't depend on it. Neither should your safety depend on you agreeing or disagreeing with the convention. So people that still hold on to this traditional outlook on life, that you need to have emotional distance between a human being exercising a function and the individual upon whom the function exercised, those people get upset when you call someone with a first name. They will get annoyed saying, no, unless you are intimately involved with someone or someone allows you, you can't use the first name. Those people get upset. Why? Because they have restrictions they hold on to. Who told them to hold on to those restrictions? The people that raised them, or the people they're involved with. Or they may like the restriction because you can use the restriction to control other people. Anyway, it's on them to hold on to the restriction. You can decide not to hold on to the restriction because the restriction is not something necessary to be alive as a human being. If they get upset with you for not holding on to the restriction, it's on them. And if they go so far that they project their pollution and their anxiety on you, now they're violating you. The moment they develop aversion, whether it's dislike or hatred towards you, because you don't hold on to their restrictions, they're narcissistic. Look, people can expect things from you. There's nothing wrong with that. But people don't have the right, and they're not entitled to just restrict you because they want to. There must be a justification for it. And you, as a human being, you have the right to negotiate in a situation when it's proper. So, if someone calls me by my first name and I've never seen an individual before, okay, hey, okay, they call me by my first name. If I get upset because a stranger called me by my first name, that's on me, not on them. I'm the one that has to go and look in the mirror and realize, you know what, this restriction I keep holding on to, you know what, it's just restriction. Who cares if you call me by my first name? You get what I'm saying? The thing is, people have biases they don't want to examine, because once they examine the bias, they have to admit it's based on nothing relevant. But because they're so invested in that bias, they hold on to restrictions, and because they hold on to restrictions to get a pat on the back, they lack self-worth. Let me tell you, nobody with healthy self-worth will hold unconditionally onto restrictions they can't even explain. Whether it's the restriction on using cuss words or the restriction on how you address people, nobody with healthy self-worth will just hold on to restrictions just like that. It's people who lack self-worth and will seek compensation in the approval of others or in controlling others that do that. So if someone calls me with my first name Rashid and I get upset and I turn on them, that's me using my own anxiety to control them. That's wrong. And that borders close to witchcraft. that borders close to abuse. If I'm a minister or I'm a CEO and someone addressed my first name, so what? They address me. If I get upset saying, hey, it's Mr. Dossett for you, or no, it's President Dossett. If I come with such an attitude, I'm the one clinging onto restrictions and I'm the one generating unrest. Look, if you prefer something, you discuss with someone, but make plain it's just your preference. And if you want people to give in to your preference, what do you offer in return? But don't just go out there with your preference and your expectations and expect people to just having to accept it because you want it. Just because you have a will doesn't mean people have to validate, not give in to your will. And this is a hard thing for people to hear, but it is the truth. And you don't have the right to harm other people because they don't validate your restrictions that you don't examine. If you lack self-worth and you compensate with this by holding on to restrictions, that's on you. You need counseling, you need therapy, and you're the one who needs deliverance. The moment you project this unrest onto other people by disliking them or hating them and coming up with excuses or having your quote-unquote reasons, you are the villain and you are the perpetrator. As simple as that. As simple as that. So beware when becoming upset with other people, lest you end up as a portal for demons to cause unrest in the earth realm. Beware. So look, when you agree or when you decide not to self-reflect and not to be involved with people that may challenge your bias, the moment you do that, you set yourself up. The moment you do that, you don't think clearly anymore. The moment you do that, you're kind of mentally ill already because you don't want to self-reflect and you don't want to process reality properly. And once you decide this, you will gravitate towards people who think and behave similar to you. Now, is it wrong to be around people who think and behave similar to you? No. But if your way of thinking is defective, if your way of thinking is wrong, and now you're around people who are similar, that's bad company. And bad company corrupts good character. That is stated in the New Testament. That's absolutely true. So the moment you insist on being left alone, the moment you insist on protecting your bias or to protect your attitude towards life, the moment you don't want to look within and just want to escape, the moment you decide this, you set yourself up and there's no way things can go well for you from that point on. No way. Things can only go downwards. Things can only go backwards. When you set yourself up like this, and by the way, you're not aware you set yourself up, but it doesn't matter. It is what you've done, and the consequence will be there. The moment you set yourself up, evil spirits pick this up, but also bad people pick this up too. And look, there are two things will happen. Some people will avoid you, and rightfully so. The reason they will avoid you is because they can clearly see you're sabotaging yourself. They can clearly see that you are putting yourself in danger and you're putting yourself at risk. And they understand perfectly well that when you put yourself at risk or you endanger yourself, that danger will also spill over to the people around you. And they know very well that you're not likely going to change your mind or review your way of thinking. And because those people don't want to end up in an argument with you or don't want you to explode on them or they don't want to put themselves at risk by becoming your enemy because you challenge them, because of that, they do what's best. They lower contact or they simply avoid you. So you're going to notice people avoiding you. The second thing you're going to notice is that you're going to have people that are going to gravitate towards you. You're suddenly going to become close with certain people out of the blue. And you will perceive this as maturity. Maybe you were in high school and to get certain people you hung out with. Now, you never speak to those people anymore at all. Now you're close with people uh, you met during work. Because when you went to college, you also had jobs besides it. Now you're close to those people, and you think, well, those people are from high school, is in the past, so that's why I don't have contact with them anymore. But what you don't notice is that the people you're close with, they do have their high school associates you're in contact with. You have nobody from high school anymore. Now, just because you're not in contact with people from high school anymore doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It can be you moved to another country, or it can be that people from high school, that a lot of them are now narcissists in life and you're not. So just because you don't have contact with people from a previous state in your life doesn't mean something wrong. But what's the context? In your case, you have this stubborn bias that you don't want to face. And other people around notice this. And other people around also notice that it's risky to be around you. So they left. The people you're around now, they see your bias, but they think they can handle it. But you think, hey, I just matured. No, you didn't. So it's always important to self-reflect and to see where improvement is needed or to see where you can do better. Now, let's say now you have this bias, but you think, hey, I'm just maturing. That's false maturity. At some point, you will go through some vulnerable state in your life, whether it's you moving, or you marrying, or you divorcing, or you having your first child, or your children moving out of the house. There will be some transition in your life when you're vulnerable, extra vulnerable. It can also be that one of your parents passed away or another relative and you need to bury them. Whatever. When you go through transitions in your life with that undiagnosed bias or with this proud attitude that you want to be left alone, you don't want to be bothered, when that happens, it's then that you will be set up. It's then that you will be dragged into cults. It's then that you will encounter this romantic partner that will bring you down. For example, there are women out there, and I'm not condemning anyone over here, but there are women out there who ended up with boyfriends that were scam artists. And the boyfriends tricked them into taking loans on their behalf. So the women took the loans. And later the guy took the money and the guy left. And as an outsider, you look at the situation and you ask yourself, hold on a minute, lady, when the guy asks you to take a loan for him because he needs the money, didn't alarm bells ring in your brain? What the heck is this? Now, when you look at such women, often they have these fairy tales, these these undiagnosed biases of how a man should be or how what they consider love should be. And here's the thing, they didn't want to be bothered with people questioning their attitude or their view on life. So they succeeded in resisting being challenged or resisting being quote unquote bothered, and they ended up with a group of friends who validate their biases. But their biases are rooted in dysfunction or sometimes even in trauma. So they set themselves up to be dysfunctional. And now this dysfunction was picked up by a scam artist or a con artist, and the fraud took advantage of the bias they set themselves up for. And now, whether the woman is aware or not that she set herself up doesn't matter. The fraud does. And now the fraud continues to set up by setting her up. And she ended up complying with things she would have never complied with. Now, some women end up in relationships where later the man ends up beating them or molesting them, or the man ends up forcing them into prostitution. And some women even have children with men who later even both abuse them and the children. Now, when such things happen, of course the feminist will come out and say, oh, violence against women, oh, the patriarchy. They'll come up with their ideology. You'll have a lot of people showing sympathy to the female who has been victimized. Well, that's understandable, all of that. But the question is she really a victim, or is she a collaborator that had to take a loss? Let me explain. If she had this proud attitude of, I don't want to be challenged, it's my life, my body, I will, I think, I this, if she had this attitude that she didn't want to self reflect nor process things properly, she didn't want to be corrected, she didn't want to be motivated, she didn't want to be coached. If she had this proud attitude, she set herself up for dysfunction. And because of that, she defected, or let me say not defected, she harmed her own mental health by doing that. And by doing that, she wasn't able anymore to process red flags, even though red flags were in her face. So she was collaborating with dysfunction, and because of that, she also ended up collaborating with the fraud. Of course, she convinced herself through her own bias that she was just in love and she thought she was doing the right thing. The truth is, she was collaborating with dysfunction. And anytime you collaborate with dysfunction, things end up worse. And in this case, the fraud took advantage of her dysfunction. But she didn't end up dysfunctional by accident. It wasn't that she was raised the wrong way or she was severely traumatized as a child and now she couldn't think clearly. If she was dysfunctional by accident, in the sense that it wasn't her fault, then that's different. But if she just wanted to be left alone and she wanted to escalate in her quote unquote free will, which doesn't exist, then it's on her. In this case, if she's victimized, okay, the victimizer who victimized her is wrong. It shouldn't have happened. But she put herself in this state of dysfunction that made her accessible to frauds and exploiters. And even when the fraud or the exploiter showed obvious signs something was wrong, consciously she recognized something is wrong, but because she was invested in her dysfunctional ways, she made excuses and she bypassed it. So she is a collaborator that had to take a loss. Does that mean it's less worse? What happened to her? No. What happened to her is bad, especially if it was fatal and she was killed. Nevertheless, you need to admit she was in on it. The same with guys. Some guys think that they have to be white knights, that they need to save a woman from her dysfunction. What? Some guys think that their dick is some magical tool that will shock a woman into becoming better. It sounds quite dumb what I'm saying now, but there are guys thinking that. There are guys thinking that their masculine strength during sex can motivate a woman to become better. If that's you believing this crap, I'm telling you, wake up. I don't know who tricked you or socialized you into this fairy tale. This fairy tale will get you in prison. This fairy tale will get you killed. This fairy tale will also get the people around you killed. Give it up. Some people are told you need to love the evil out of someone. No, it doesn't work that way. Nobody is born evil. Nobody becomes evil by accident. People become evil because they insist in their reprobate ways. That's it. Evil is a dedication. It's not just a choice you make at once. Now, if you set yourself up for dysfunction, are you evil? No. Because the moment you crash, you realize, man, what is this? You will look for answers. It may be a hard pill to swallow that you were in on it, but hey, you need to accept that. People that set themselves up for dysfunction are not by definition evil. If they refuse to admit their own participation, then they become bad people. And once they become bad people, They can become evil if they turn reprobate. But just realize that there are people out there who are dysfunctional, not by accident, but on purpose. They set themselves up. They're not aware they've done it, but that's what happened. So if you would call them out on it, they would deny it, because according to them, that's not the case. They really don't realize that they've set themselves up for dysfunction. So don't just tell them, man, it's all on you, this and that. Don't attack them. Just give them knowledge and inform them about what happened, if they're willing to receive it, because not all of them are willing to receive it. So understand this: when you set yourself up for dysfunction, you're guaranteed there will be bitter consequences that will follow. Some people encounter fatal consequences. They end up in bad situations, they don't survive. So don't set yourself up. Don't do it. Well, that's it for now. Keep on agreeing with Christ and be at peace.